Now, normally I'm not in white people business, but there's something about this case or this story out of Kansas City or, the state of Kansas where 3 men were found on the property, frozen to death, of their friend after attending his football game watching party at his house. And it looks like there won't be any repercussions. Fendi, like the bag. This is the I Refuse podcast. It's Mr. Foxy I Refuse podcast. Look, I know on the podcast I tend to just talk mostly about pop culture stuff. If you've been over at the I Refuse podcast, over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the content usually runs more towards like reviews, mental health. We talk about misogyny, we talk about social, cultural things, and we discuss it from a personal color perspective. I don't normally go up for white people a whole lot. There's a short list of white people I go up for. I don't really mind white people business like that. I always found the last 10 or so years, they've always been in our business. Not to tell the truth, but to have a moment, that's a whole different video for a whole different day. But I was on IG yesterday, and, I am a follower of the Neighborhood Talk page. And most of that stuff, I just kind of, scroll through onto something else, don't really pay attention. But this particular story stopped me for a bit because, A, I'm just naturally curious about things that just don't make any sense. And B, my tuning fork for when it's clear that people are playing in other people's faces. This particular story touched on those two things. Now, when I think about this story, I think about also, how adults go to their friend's house or people they think they're friends of and end up dead mysteriously. And nobody else in the house is charged. Nobody in the house sees any pushback or repercussions legally. Nobody's fined or sued civilly. It's just like, oh, well, we had a sleepover and, this black lady just mysteriously ended up dead, and all the footage is missing or edited some kind of way. Very crazy. This particular story, though, while there isn't a black person involved, something just isn't curling all the way around for me about it. So in Kansas, there was this guy that had, like I said, a football watching party at his house and invited 3 additional guys over, 3 of his friends. They had the football watching party. The game was over. The 3 guys left. This is what I'm theorizing. And the guy went to bed. Fast forward 2 or 3 days later, the families of these 3 guys, these 3 other guys, hadn't heard from them since they went to the football watching party. Claimed that they reached out to the guy whose house they went to at the football watching party. And it wasn't until the cops showed up that they found the 3 guys frozen to death. They said there were, there were one man's body was found on the back porch while the other two were in the backyard. So here's the thing, right? Let me just pause there. Let me just pause there. I don't care what style of the house it is, whether it's a rancher, a two-story, a duplex. 2 days go by. And these are 2 days that you are living in this house. You are going about your day. You have dogs. You're letting them out. You're taking the trash out. The sun rises and falls 3 times. Of course you've left the house. Of course, like, you had to leave the house. You've had to, like I said, let your dogs out the backyard. And I'm going to go even further and say the cars that these men came to your house in, still outside. And the best you can give is that you didn't know that they were out there. One of the things I'm starting to like think and process on is, you know how, they can, if you're part of a situation that ultimately leads to some kind of death on your property, or you're part of something, like you're part of something, even physically just being there during the commission of a crime. Like, the key word is commission. Just like they could charge you with the same crime they would charge the other people in the case, or just like why couldn't they apply that same kind of concept to, you had something at your house that brought these 3 men to your house. You have the event. You know that they left. And for 2 or 3 days, over the course of that time, these men froze to death on your property. One as close as on the back porch, like right outside the windows of your house. The other 2 in the backyard. On your property. As a homeowner, just like you would be responsible, if not criminally, civilly liable for injury and death on your property, there has to be some kind of criminal liability, because you have a responsibility to these people's lives while they're on your property, and they died on your property. Now, just like in my previous example where I say, during the commission of a crime you were present, therefore the state could charge you. You may not have actually inflicted damage by weapon or physical hands that led to the death of these people, but the demise of their life occurred on your property. Over the course of 3 days. I'll go even further. So during a news appearance, you know, the local news out there, one of the channels had covered the story and did a interview / call or whatever with the family members, I think, of all three or a couple of the men that died. They go on to say that not only did they text and call the guy that owned the house and had the party and asked and were, you know, asking about the three guys, but they also knew that one of the guys the couple of guys were banging on the back window, banging on the door, even broke through some of the glass. And when the cops showed up, you know, the guy came out in his boxers and wine in the glass. I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna play the clip, and y'all can tell me what y'all think.
I think too, anyone following this story from near or far can agree that something just doesn't add up here, right? Three friends don't just get together for a football game and freeze to death, which is what the guy who lives in that home says happened. What does your mother's intuition tell you, Norma?
That something is not right, and he should be arrested. He should at least be investigated, and they are not doing anything.
Jonathan, what's your sibling gut check here? And, you know, to your mom's point, can you offer any more insights as to who this man was who hosted Ricky and his friends? How he didn't know that there were bodies in the backyard, or didn't report that there were bodies in the backyard for days on end? What are you learning from law enforcement?
Well, law enforcement hasn't spoken to me specifically, but it's mostly word of mouth right now. And what we do know is that he did have animals that do need to go outside. You know, they didn't get enough snow to really think that would, you know, cover an entire person. And, you know, dogs have that sense. You know, there's many different things that don't add up that we just don't understand, and how somebody would not be at least investigated in any way.
Husbands and friends banged on his door, busted a window, and yelled and announced her presence while she's inside, and still nothing from them. Then the cops came 10 minutes later, and he comes out nonchalant in his boxers with an empty wine glass in hand. So I will say it'll be an uphill battle, because there's not, although the guy may or may not be the property owner, they'll probably get to like a third degree or not even manslaughter at this point. However, I have to ask the question, like, what would cause a person to be so nonchalant about human life? Like, people are calling you, people are texting you, people are messaging you, you know, while they're searching for their loved ones, and before the cops even show up. So you knew something was amiss then. like, there has to be something in the future. There has to be something that in the law or legal, in the legal world, that comes out that puts people on the hook for this kind of thing. Like, it has to be adjacent to when, you know, bar owners and bartenders are on the hook if a person leaves their establishment drunk, gets into an accident, and then the recourse goes back to the bar and the bar owners. Which is why some of the people, when you go to the bar and it's clear to them that you've had enough, they cut you off. Because they would be liable if you leave there currently smashed or even more smashed on their hands, and then go out and get into your car and kill like 4 or 5 people. Why can't this kind of thing be for this guy? Like, you gotta come better than or stronger than you didn't know your 3 friends were dead in your backyard. Especially considering the snow wasn't that bad and the sun came up and went down 3 times. And we know you're not in your house the whole time. Like, it just doesn't curl all the way around for me, because what's wrong with you, yo? And I'll even go as far as to say that, is that even the story? I mean, it's foul in all caps. But I know he's not gonna, this guy's not gonna get hit with a full, like, capital murder charge. I don't even think manslaughter. But he's going to be responsible to some degree over it. I've always been fascinated by mysterious things. If you go back to as early as season 2, season 3 of the I Refuse podcast, wherever you get your podcast, I talked about a case out of Connecticut, the Lauren Smith Fields case. And once I revisited and did a follow-up, because I was like, this girl went on a Bumble date, invited the guy back, left her apartment to go see her cousin outside, came back, went to the bathroom, came out of the bathroom, finished the rest of the date, and during the course of the latter part of the night, her nose starts bleeding and, you know, other things start happening, like stuff comes out of her mouth. Date just opted not to take her to the ER, get her checked out. They go to sleep together. He wakes up. She doesn't. And people were like, it was clearly she was given something from her cousin. But the parallels are that a whole month or so went by. Nobody from the police department, this guy, the so-called cousin that saw her, the apartment complex, did not reach out to the family for almost 2 months. It wasn't until they did a visit and saw a note on the door that the news story or the story gained traction. And I was just like, God damn. Like, and to this day, I don't think the guy she went on a date with faces like any kind of repercussions. It has to be some kind of, these kind of stories, there has to be some kind of welfare law, welfare culpability, recourse when it comes to the moment you are in somebody's house or they let you in their house, they're ultimately responsible to make sure that you are safe and you are okay. And at the very least, get help and call the medics and all that to the house. It's like, if you and I are outside of a warehouse, a building that is catching fire, we were just in that building, probably as squatters, probably as homeless people, and instead of calling 911, we just bounce. And not only does the building burn down, but it also causes damage to other buildings and other businesses. I would feel some kind of obligation. Like, if you charged me, I would feel like, I should have called, but and because the logic is, as you called, the damage more than likely wouldn't have increased. And you could have saved a life. Because calling is action. Just like if a person was choking and you know CPR and you don't intervene, doing CPR to the best of your ability means you value life and you're trying to save a life, versus you're sitting there while a person's choking and you're just continuing your dinner. It's like, you hear stories all the time of people getting hit by cars, the driver driving off, both sides of the street, people are walking past as this person is laying in the middle of the street, elderly or mine or your age. And the person eventually dies. Like, it's just wild to me. Like, we've gotten to a point to where we're just so numb and so apathetic and so we just don't value other people's lives anymore. I don't know how they living in Kansas, but clearly, with friends like these, you don't need enemies, really. This is Mr. Fossey, I Refuse podcast. Thought I'd come up on here. I know it's been a little while on the YouTube channel. Trying to take more than 5 or 6 days. Be sure to check out the I Refuse podcast wherever you get your podcast and your music. We just dropped a new episode over there called The Court Jester. If you're not following the link on the YouTube channel, we do have a Twitter page. The link is there at I Refuse Podcast. It's also on Instagram at I Refuse Podcast _ between the words. And the link is also on the YouTube channel. 8 streaming platforms, there's no excuse. Also have the Usual Suspects podcast and the I Refuse podcast After Dark. The frequency of episodes on those 2 podcasts are monthly. We just dropped a new episode on the Usual Suspects podcast this past Sunday. And the next episode on the I Refuse podcast After Dark is dropping on February the 1st. Again, also on 8 streaming platforms. You know where to check those out. Until the meantime, continue to follow and subscribe and show love. And we will catch you guys next time. Fendi, like the bag. This is the I Refuse.